Hello, today we'll be discussing Plato's Apology. The Apology is likely to be one of Plato's earliest works, and it relays the trial of his teacher, Socrates. In that, the apology here is not in the I'm sorry sense, quite rather the opposite. It's an apologia, or defense. The apology is a little strange among Plato's corpus, in that it is not really a dialogue, like most others. It is almost entirely just the speech Socrates gave professing his innocence before the court. The Apology is also probably the most straightforward of Plato's writings, and for that reason it is the most widely read one in the modern age. To that end, there are undoubtedly countless videos covering this subject, and much has already been said. Fortunately, though, my desire to do something distinct here coincides with the Apology's demand for a special treatment different from the other works. You see, there is an external context behind the Apology that may shape the way you interpret it, which I will share. To begin, let us consider Socrates' charges: corrupting the youth, and impiety. It is somewhat easy to perceive these allegations as vague and an overreaction, especially in the face of the inability of Socrates' accusers to sufficiently defend their claims. It is as Socrates insinuates at the beginning of the Apology. He is not just confronting the charges brought against him by the prosecution, he is also fighting against the larger prejudice in Athens that has developed over the years. To understand that, we must learn some ancient Greek history. Okay, so the classical Greek world was divided into a number of different independent city-states, the most prominent among them being Athens and Sparta. And in 431 BC, those two brutally fought each other over an almost 30-year period in a conflict called the Peloponnesian War. Athens, which was the most powerful polity at the start of the war, and where Socrates and Plato were from, lost to Sparta. In the consequence of the surrender, Sparta stripped away Athens' democracy and imposed onto it a puppet government known as the 30 Tyrants. While this group despotically ruled Athens for less than a year, during that time they managed to murder and exile thousands of citizens before being overthrown in a revolution in 403 BC. And this was just 4 short years before Socrates' trial. But why mention all this? What's the connection? Well, as it happened, Socrates, who was already not the most popular person beforehand, had certain unfortunate associations with two disreputable and controversial figures. At that time, Socrates' most famous former pupils were a pair of men named Alcibiades and Critias, and they were both direct contributors to Athens' recent tragedies. The first, Alcibiades, was a prominent general who brazenly betrayed Athens during the Peloponnesian War by defecting to the Spartans and then later to the Persians. Nevertheless, he was still given a second chance, and welcomed back only to lose 1/4 of his ships in a naval battle, permanently ending his career. Socrates' other former student, Critias, get this, was the leader of the 30 Tyrants. Oof, that's rough. Needless to say, these factors, in conjunction with Socrates' known disdain for democracy, furthered the suspicions around him and established a general political backdrop to his trial. So, how did this influence Socrates' defense? Good question. There are some latent responses to this preceding history in the Apology. For starters, Socrates distances himself from the political sphere and the 30 tyrants by recounting an anecdote where he defied them by refusing to turn in a man who they wanted to unjustly punish. And Socrates really had badly fallen out with Critias by that point. However, Socrates' deliberate decision to remain in Athens under the tyrants, when many others had fled, was seen as a potential soft endorsement. In any case, Socrates also explicitly states that he is not responsible for anything his followers do or say. Quote, "Throughout my life, in any public activity I may have engaged in, I am the same man as I am in private life. I have never come to an agreement with anyone to act unjustly, neither with anyone else nor with any one of those who they slanderously say are my pupils. I have never been anyone's teacher. I cannot justly be held responsible for the good or bad conduct of these people, as I never promised to teach them anything, and have not done so. If anyone says that he has learned anything from me, or that he heard anything privately that the others did not hear, be assured that he is not telling the truth." Alright, I hope you can kind of see why I have decided to start with this outside context, as it may cast the arguments and the trial in a new light. So with that in mind, let's transition to Socrates' response to the charges leveled against him. The text begins with Socrates explaining to the jury that at 70 years old, this marks his first time in court. He does not intend to or know how to speak in an ornate or artificial manner. Socrates is just going to be himself. He has three men accusing him: Anytus, representing the craftsmen and the politicians; Melitus, on behalf of the poets; and Lycon, for the orators of Athens. But before acknowledging his charges from the three accusers, Socrates first addresses the elephant in the room. The jury, which is composed of around 500 random Athenian citizens, has already been inundated with other negative rumors about him, going back decades. As an example, Socrates cites the parody of him in Aristophanes' play, The Clouds. In that satire, Socrates is portrayed as a silly crackpot who runs a scuffed school where he rants about religious matters and studies fleas. This unfavorable rendering of Socrates was part of a larger war between artists and philosophers, which is discussed in depth in other Plato works, so I'll just let that go for now. Anyway, Socrates denies knowing anything about things in the sky and below the earth, and certainly doesn't go about teaching it. But Socrates is really more confounded by the more prevalent conception of him as a sophist. Sophists, for those of you who don't know, were teachers who sold their skills of rhetoric for high fees. Plato thoroughly despised the sophists, and many of his dialogues are dedicated to combating them. Sophists were characterized by their false wisdom, deceptive communication styles, and the intentional presenting of weak arguments and reasoning in a way that made them seem stronger than they actually were. Even today, to be called a sophist in philosophy is a pretty serious accusation. Think of selling oneself as having more knowledge than one does, or for making arguments one knows to be false, or one does not truly believe in order to win in debate. To get back on track, though, Socrates knows he's not a sophist because A, he doesn't sell any services, even though he's broke, and B, because he knows nothing. And this prompts Socrates to explain his origin story, an actual occupation. Some time ago, Socrates' friend, Chaerephon, had visited the oracle of Delphi and asked her if there was anyone wiser than Socrates, to which she replied that no one was wiser. A quick note here, by the way, how this worked was that the oracle was said to be possessed by the Greek god Apollo. So Socrates was surprised by this. He asked himself, what is his riddle? I'm very conscious that I'm not wise at all. What, then, does he mean by saying that I am the wisest? For surely he does not lie. It is not legitimate for him to do so. And so Socrates decided to go around Athens in a quest to find someone wiser than him. He started by examining the politicians. Through his questioning of them, Socrates realized that although the politicians thought themselves wise, they were really not at all. And when he endeavored to prove that to them, they quickly grew angry and resentful. Next, Socrates inspected the poets and writers. He found that they were unable to even explain their own art. They were just saying things, lacking a deep understanding, and were often purposely being obscure so as to conceal that truth. Finally, Socrates visited the craftsmen. Now, while the craftsmen did have specialized knowledge of their crafts, they also presumptuously assumed they had expertise in many other domains of which they did not. From this, Socrates concluded that the wisdom the oracle spoke of must be knowing one's own ignorance, and so Socrates decided that his life mission, divinely sanctioned, was to go about exposing those with false and pretended wisdom. In the course of this pursuit, Socrates picked up young followers who liked to listen to and imitate his questioning style. However, those questioned by Socrates and his acolytes grew hateful of the philosopher, and so he became unpopular in Athens. So having fully explained himself, Socrates is now ready to directly address his formal indictments. Once again, they are for corrupting the young, and for impiety, specifically for not believing in the gods in whom the city believes, but in other, new spiritual things. To counter these claims, Socrates interrogates one of his accusers, Melitus. In regard to the first purported offense here, of corrupting the youth, Socrates says it is nonsensical. His reasoning is that corrupting those around you would incite immediate harms that would reverberate against you, which makes Melitus' assertion that Socrates deliberately engages in the spread of wickedness unlikely. Why would he intentionally promote evils among his brethren and in his society which he loves and lives in? Socrates must either be not corrupting the youth, or alternatively, he must be doing it unintentionally, which requires non-legal, personal adjustments to remedy. As to the accusation of impiety, here Socrates plays Melitus against himself by prompting him to exaggerate Socrates' assumed infractions. Remember, the original technical charges essentially were that Socrates doesn't fully believe in all the Athenian gods and that he creates new divinities. However, Socrates' probing leads Melodus to overstate his case. He declares that Socrates believes in no gods, that he is a complete atheist. But Socrates does believe in spirits, which are the children of gods, meaning that he must believe in gods as well. In fact, Socrates seems to suggest that he has an intimate connection with some sort of spiritual conscience that instructs him in what he ought not to do. Whatever the case, Melodus has contradicted himself by alleging that Socrates does not and does believe in gods. A final word here before we move on, though. Debatably, Socrates is legitimately guilty of impiety as originally laid out. Sure, Socrates claims that his mission ultimately derived from Apollo, but even the sincerity in that is a little questionable. He appears generally uninterested in the traditional Greek gods, and never really deferred to the pantheon for any moral or cosmological clarity. And in all honesty, it does kind of look like he was managing independent spiritual things as reported. One may very well walk away thinking that Socrates only emerged from this exchange optically victorious because Melodus didn't know what he was talking about and changed the argument. But let us continue. Socrates lets the jury know that he does not fear death, as it is foolish to do so, and furthermore, he emphasizes to them that even if they acquit him, he will never stop practicing philosophy, as it is the divine wish. Once again, Socrates arguably seems to invoke the authority of traditional religion only when tactically useful. Anyways, he tells all those present, "I was attached to this city by the god, though it seems a ridiculous thing to say, as upon a great and noble horse, which was somewhat sluggish because of its size, and needed to be stirred up by a kind of gadfly. It is to fulfill some such function that I believe the god has placed me in the city. Socrates is that gadfly. His job is to awaken the people of Athens to their need to focus on truth, wisdom, and the condition of their souls before any material concern." Socrates ends his speech by maintaining that he will not beg for a reprieve, he will not trot out his children to elicit sympathy, and that such spectacles only serve to make a mockery of Athens. He has made his case, the prosecution has made theirs. Now it's up to the jury to decide. Unfortunately, the jury delivered a guilty verdict. Socrates is not angry about the decision. He is only surprised that the vote margin was relatively close. So the next step in the Athenian courts was that both the plaintiff and the defendant would propose a punishment which the jury votes on next. Melodus and the accusers have asked for death. Socrates thinks for a moment. He knows he did nothing seriously wrong, and he knows that he dedicated his life for the betterment of Athens. What could he possibly propose as a punishment unto himself? "Well," says Socrates, "so, if I must make a just assessment of what I deserve, I assess it as this: free meals in the Prytaneum." While this is really funny, it is obviously not doing him any favors in the eyes of the court. But what's the alternative? Socrates sees no reason to live locked up in a cell. If he is instead forced to pay a large fine, he has not the means to do so, so he'll just end up in a cell anyway. If he gets exiled, Socrates knows he'll find himself in the exact same situation, wherever he may go. But why won't Socrates just give it up? Why can't he take a quiet life somewhere? Because, he replies, the unexamined life is not worth living. As a final suggestion for his own punishment, Socrates offers all the money he has and intimates that his followers could chip in if needed. It is fruitless, though. The jury votes against him by a greater margin than the first time. Socrates has been sentenced to death. Socrates admonishes those who have just condemned him. He's already old. If they had just waited, their problem would have taken care of itself. Now they have blood on their hands. Nevertheless, Socrates does not regret that he did not sell himself out and grovel before the jury, saying what they wanted to hear. He predicts that his legacy will live on with a vengeance, and those who wish to silence him will be haunted by the consequences of their injustice. Socrates is not worried about his own fate. He wonders, maybe death is a good thing. Maybe, he says, it's like a dreamless sleep. Or maybe he really will see Homer, Hesiod, and Sisyphus in some other place. Socrates is not that upset. His divine sign never stopped him in the course of his defense. And so he concludes in final, solemn words, "Now the hour to part has come. I go to die, you go to live. Which of us goes to the better lot is known to no one, except the god." And so we've reached the end of Plato's Apology. What did you think of this monumental work? Was Socrates innocent or guilty in your eyes? How would you rate the quality of his arguments? Do not hesitate to share any thoughts in the comments down below. If you like this content, please do consider subscribing. To all my Plato chads out there, the next dialogue video will be out in a few weeks' time. As always, thank you for watching. I hope you have a good one. I'm reading Plato's dialogues, and it seems like Socrates would be really annoying if you were an Athenian. Standing around at the market on a busy day, maybe you're on a quick break, and you say something or make some offhand remark, only to have this guy smell blood in the water and amble towards you so he can draw you into a debate and act like a fool and patronize you. Please, Socrates. Unlike you, I work for a living. Just imagine if he had been born in the time of cell phones. Hey bro, quick question. I noticed that you said these baby tomatoes were the greatest, and I said to myself, here's a wise man, and I was wondering, how do you define the greatest? For surely, if we can imagine a great thing, we must be able to also imagine a greater thing. Points phone at you, clearly recording. Several days later, videos uploaded to YouTube titled, Athenian questioned about nature perfect forms. Answers refuted. And the entire clip is voiced over by Plato, muttering, "Oh shit, Socrates, you fucking got him," and "damn, true dat," over and over while you were ruthlessly interrogated over what exactly you meant by, "These are the best tomatoes I've ever had," just because you made the mistake of going to the market to get some groceries instead of sending a slave.